Okay, you see a full screen?
Yes, again.
All right. So hi, I'm Ken Granderson. I'm founder and chief technology officer of Blackfacts.com, where we create technologies that uplift the race. My presentation today is called Using JsonPath to Map Data from Any API, which will demonstrate how you can consume data of any complexity from any JSON-based API and map it to your data structures through a freely available and easy to use convention called JsonPath. So here's my agenda for this brief talk. First, I'm going to show you a couple of screens from the newest feature of Blackfacts, which is called Wakanda News, where we use multiple APIs to analyze Black and Black interest news from 160 sources in the USA, Caribbean, and the African continent. Then I'll introduce you to the concept of JsonPath and show you how we're using it to parse API data. Well, first how you can use it and how we're using it, show you some online resources where you can learn how to play, you can learn about and play with APIs and JsonPath. And then finally, I'm going to challenge you to create some technology that does something good for Black people, to use your talents to bring a little piece of the fictional nation of Wakanda, who was able to protect and preserve its people and culture by creating and controlling advanced technology into the real world that you and I inhabit today. And also, as I've been a professional software developer for close to 30 years, I'm going to share a few insights along the way. A lot to cover, only 10 minutes to do it, so I'm going to go fast, but you'll be able to download this presentation at the end. So let's get started. So this is our Wakanda News service at blackfacts.com/news. This was a snapshot taken last night. And you can see, like I said, Black news from all around the world. And I'm not going to read all the sidebar elements because, again, you can get a copy of the presentation later. I'm trying to be respectful of the time. After you see the main news, if you click on any news story, you'll see a page that gives you a little bit of details. But most importantly for this presentation is that under the main story, you see related news that's in a panel called You May Also Like. And that's populated by third-party APIs. This is a snapshot of some of our database schema where news and historical facts are linked together by common metadata, people, places, things, etc. And again, we pull this from multiple third-party JSON APIs. Our first API was from a company called Aylien, who gives us text extraction, i.e., you just point a URL and they find the actual content from the URL, as well as text analysis, the people, places, things. And guess what? They're going to be deprecating that service, so we needed to find some new APIs to work with. Our second API that we've been using for a while is IBM Watson's natural language understanding. Something that I do frequently is try and code for more than one solution. So that's our first OG tip. Practice abstract problem solving, code to solve the pattern, not just the scenario in front of you. So I developed this to work with both APIs at the same time to avoid locking myself into a single solution and making sure I can build a platform solution, because that's what I do. I build platforms. So when we look at the data that we get, and don't worry if you can't see the details, it's just a snapshot of some of the JSON data that comes back from the same article on Kamala Harris, where Aylien and Watson, they give us lists of people in addition to also places, etc., but it's slightly different formats. So what are we going to do? You know, what I said was, you know what if there was a way to define paths in JSON, just like XML? Let me go Google that. And again, little tip, by default, when you run into a roadblock, assume someone else has run into that problem before, search creatively. Even if you don't find a solution, you often will find reasons that you shouldn't have tried the thing that came to mind first. So looky here, what did I find? Something called JsonPath. It does for JSON what XPath that I've been using for years does for XML. Helps you find data buried within complex data structures. I'm not even sure who made it up, but I found several implementations, including a few that work with my code stack. I've been a Microsoft developer since like 1992, so I'm a C# guy. So mission accomplished. I found code that worked, that I can use. Great. So, and I'm going to show you, some examples in a moment. So on the JsonPath.com website, you actually have an interactive evaluator and what you're seeing here is an example of the data that came back from Aylien and the rule that I created to find the people from the Aylien data. So OG tip time, RTFM. If you don't know what it means, look it up. The main thing here is use evaluators, whether it is, you're at a breakpoint or tools like this, to really experience and learn up close and personal and the real way that this stuff works, not how it works in the documentation. This is the same JsonPath.com with the Watson data and a somewhat different rule to basically to end up with the same results of the people that were coming from the two different services hitting that same article. So I have two same columns in different JSON paths. So what am I going to do? I'm thinking of what's the pattern, not just the problem in front of me. And I said, okay, what's the same is each schema field, regardless of the API, I have one rule. So what I did was I threw the stuff into an Access database because it's easy to edit multi-line content. And you'll see in the next screen a closer example of what I ended up coming up with. So what I did was I invented these quote JSON mappings where JSON keywords, people, places, those are my database columns. And I came up with a rule that I developed in the JSON Path online evaluator for each of those columns for each of the APIs. The other screen behind it is actual JSON that I came up with to help me call any API. Why? Because I don't want to be limited to Aylien and Watson. I want to be able to call any API under the sun. So I'm using a JSON object to specify how to call an API that returns JSON, and then using more JSON to map the API to get to the schema I want. I'm not going to say how I came up with that, but anyway. And I said I threw it into the database. Databases are my bestest friends. I use databases for everything. Why? Because once you put something into a database, it's no more work to handle 1,000 scenarios than it is to handle one. And that's important if you want to build platforms, if you want to be like me. I'm basically a one-man development shop. I've built everything in Blackfacts from like my on-prem virtual host server to the databases, to the middleware code, to the front-end code. So, leveraging tools like databases puts you in a position where you can scale infinitely. And as a note says, I've recently even been starting to play with dynamic SQL and stuff to make everything parameters. And, big plug for databases, whatever platform you want, you're on, use databases. They're your best friends. The actual code, my C# code that uses this stuff comes down to only like a couple hundred lines of code that I'm running inside a Windows service that I'll show you on the next screen. So basically with a very small amount of code, but because I've architected this with a sense for making everything infinite, I can handle any number of fields, I can handle any number of APIs, and when I put it in a service, as you'll see in the next screen, I can run this thing, 24/7. On the left side, it just happened to be open when I opened up Visual Studio, behavior-driven development. I strongly encourage you to consider using like test-driven development or behavior-driven development. Why? Because it's the kind of technology that not everyone does. And I have made a point during my career to learn stuff that other folks don't know. So you become a rare item. You become the commodity that was just being discussed. I mean, a rare commodity, not a replaceable commodity. So anyway, the API processor service, you'll see the screen that has the Wakanda API processor, bulk mailing services, ELT processor, RSS processor. I leverage things like the Windows services infrastructure. On Linux, it has a services infrastructure too. And things like Slack, where everything I do, I use Slack for monitoring and whatever. If you can see, I've got like dozens of little Slack channels. Why? because I don't have to set that up. I don't have to keep it going. It's the same code that I use for everything, and it helps me, you know, massively scale my output with, you know, the little bit of code. So, you know, tip, yeah, use these tools, give yourself more power. Power is good. You can handle it. You deserve it. So that's it. This is how we do it, to use the old New Jack Swing song. That's how we leverage this simple principle called JsonPath to keep the news flowing 24/7. And that screen was new news that happened at the end of the night. You know, so, you know, news is being pulled in all the time, and it's being updated 24/7. So I mentioned I want lots of different APIs. Where can I find APIs? Well, here's a website where I found lots of APIs, rapidapi.com. You can search for different APIs that do different things. You can test those APIs out. You can subscribe to them. You can monitor your usage. When I say subscribe, most of them have a free tier, you know, so you can just click, subscribe, and then you can test it out. And they have code snippets in a whole bunch of different languages that you can try that API out and see, does this give you the data that you need? So, you know, really, really love this Rapid API page, but I also found that it was a little bit clunky to test with different articles. So something that I generally end up doing sooner or later, because I find third-party tools are not flexible enough to really be efficient. I'm an efficiency like zealot, you know? So I roll my own tools. So this is one of the screens in the Blackfacts admin page where we've got thousands of articles from the different Black publications, and though you can't see it under the pink area, you only see one API, but all the APIs I've subscribed to and then a few other third-party ones, I can test any of them with real data and get an idea of, does this API work really well? And I was really geeked that I was able to reuse most of my code. And another tip, reusable code, you get better with time, so start now. JsonPath resources. Here's a list of different JsonPath resources. Again, I'm going to give you a link where you can download this. You know, so different languages. There's some videos and you know, JsonPaths are just so cool because, you know, all the APIs out, maybe not all, but most of them, you know, they use JSON to call them. They use JSON to get the data. So no matter what your application is, there's a good chance that you can leverage JsonPath to map the data from however it's being returned from that API to how you need it. So in closing, I said I was going to encourage you to create technologies for Black people. And so here we are. While I don't know you folks, I think I know something about you. And what I think I know about you is that you don't really realize the potential that you have to positively impact the Black community with the technical knowledge that you already possess. Because if you did, I think that we would see more of us helping our organizations, our businesses, our faith organizations, our political candidates leverage technology to just do things so much more powerfully than they can now. I think we would see more of our brothers, sisters, and cousins who are not in the tech industry using the computers and devices they already have to put themselves on better career tracks so that they won't be impacted as much in our new norm. So 25 years ago, when I quit my first tech job because I sold enough copies of a program that I wrote to replace my salary, I used my technical knowledge to put organizations and businesses in my community, the local Black newspaper, and then my entire community of Roxbury online. I did this without connections. I did this without investors. And this was all before freely available software, frameworks, high-speed internet, and everyone having a mobile device. So what I see right now is that everyone's trying to get into the industry or better position themselves, which is important, but it's not enough. And what I mean is that while you getting a good tech job means that your grandkids are going to go to good schools, history suggests that's not going to change things much outside you and your immediate family. So creating positive impact on our community requires conscious thought and effort. And while I'm certainly not going to be presumptuous enough to say what that should look like or what you should do, if you just consider the possibility that what you're doing can have an impact in your community in ways that really open doors that you've walked through, and make sure you keep those doors open, because we've seen in the last 4 years, we cannot take those for granted. You know, consider it, because we're in the most influential industry on the planet. And if anyone has the potential to help our communities move forward, it's us. So last slide, here's information, contact information, information on some presentations and stuff. This presentation, blackfacts.com, authors, whatever, or if you send me a message in the Slack or whatever, I'll be happy to send it to you. I forgot to make a user-friendly link for that one. But closing thought, inclusion is only needed when you haven't created your own. The only thing I've ever asked from a mainstream tech company was for my former employer to not stand in my way when they agreed to give up intellectual property rights on anything that I was going to create. So while you're supporting initiatives to push for more diversity and inclusion in technology, also try to keep in mind that the only thing stopping you from creating your own, especially today, is just not doing it. That's all. So thank you for listening. Hope I didn't go over time, and I'm happy to have the opportunity to share these thoughts with you. And JsonPath, it's the joint. Thanks.
Thanks, Ken.
And so I'm going to stop sharing. There you go.